I can't fetch or verify latest factual information from reliable online sources in real time from here. What I can do is, one, flag the specific people, roles, weapons, and claims in your text that require verification against primary statements and credible outlets. And two, rewrite part one in a clean journalist-style script, approximately 1,250 words, that preserves the key quoted statements verbatim, bold with the speaker named at the start, while clearly attributing contested claims. A dangerous new phase is taking shape in the Iran-Israel confrontation, with both sides signaling that what began as tit-for-tat strikes is hardening into a sustained campaign, one that may increasingly target the systems that keep countries running, transport corridors, industrial sites, and national infrastructure. On Iran's side, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is presenting what it calls a major shift in how it is conducting missile operations. In statements carried by Iranian state-linked messaging, the IRGC said it has used twin launch systems for the first time, an approach it claims effectively doubles the volume of missiles it can fire in a given window by enabling paired launches. If accurate, that would matter for more than sheer numbers. Launching in pairs can be a tactical adjustment designed to complicate interception by compressing warning time, increasing the density of incoming threats, and raising the odds that air defenses are forced into split-second prioritization decisions. It also signals intent. Iran appears to be messaging that it is not only willing to keep firing, but that it is adapting its methods to make those strikes harder to stop. The IRGC also claimed it hit more than 30 targets across central and southern Israel, naming major population centers including Tel Aviv, Rishon LeZion, Petah Tikva, and Beersheba. Those claims, including the number of targets and the scale of any damage, would require independent verification, especially given the high stakes and the long history of information warfare and inflated battlefield reporting during major escalations. Iran's messaging went further, warning that heavier attacks are coming and indicating a willingness to broaden the target set. In its statements, the IRGC said industrial sites, infrastructure, and military centers would be next, language that immediately raises alarm because it blurs the line between military objectives and civilian systems that support daily life. In a direct warning aimed at the Israeli public, the IRGC urged civilians in certain areas to leave. Evacuation warnings in conflict zones can be read in two ways at once: as a signal of imminent strikes and as a psychological operation meant to sow fear, trigger displacement, and amplify the sense that no place is safe. Either way, the message is that this confrontation is being framed less as a limited exchange and more as an ongoing campaign. Iranian state-linked messaging described the shift in technical terms through UG, the IRGC's aerospace command. The transcript attributes comments to an official identified as Majid Mousavi, described as head of the IRGC Aerospace Force, saying the twin launcher approach marks the beginning of a new stage and that it includes Fateh missiles, part of a known family of Iranian short-range ballistic missiles. Other missile names cited in the transcript are unclear and would need careful verification against established defense reporting and official statements. In a separate statement, the IRGC also announced what it called WAVE, 99 inches of an operation it referred to as True Promise 4, repeating a familiar line aimed at shaping international perception of Iran's intent and rules of engagement. The statement included the claim that Iran does not target civilians, language frequently used by parties to a conflict to justify operations and preempt condemnation, even when the effects of strikes can be felt far beyond military installations. While Iran projects an image of expanding capability and resolve, Israel's military leadership is also signaling that it believes the campaign is approaching a decisive phase. The transcript quotes Israel's Chief of the General Staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, describing Israel as nearing a turning point and standing at a strategic crossroads in its joint campaign against Iran. In the remarks attributed to him, Zamir says Israel believes it has already achieved measurable progress toward the objectives it set when it launched the operation, and that it intends to intensify pressure. In the statement as presented, Zamir is quoted saying, Lieutenant General Al Zamir, approaching a strategic crossroads in the joint campaign against Iran. So far, we have achieved significant accomplishments also in relation to the objectives we set when launching the operation. We will continue to act with determination and deepen the blows to the regime. The phrase strategic crossroads is often used by military leaders to suggest that decisions made next will shape the trajectory of the conflict, whether it expands, narrows, or shifts into a longer war of attrition. It can also signal an attempt to prepare domestic and international audiences for a campaign that may become broader and more costly. On the operational front, the transcript describes Israeli airstrikes inside Iran that targeted transportation infrastructure citing reporting attributed to the Times of Israel. It says Israeli forces bombed around 10 key rail sections and bridges, and that the strikes were preceded by an Israeli warning posted on social media telling civilians to stay away from trains until the evening. The stated rationale, according to security officials cited in that report, was that the IRGC had used rail lines and highway bridges to move weapons and military supplies. If confirmed, targeting transport corridors would represent a deliberate attempt to disrupt logistics, degrading Iran's ability to move material key secretly across the country and complicating the resupply of units and launch sites, but such strikes also carry significant civilian consequences. Rail and road networks are not just military arteries, they are essential for commerce, medical access, and daily life. Disruptions can ripple through supply chains, raise the risk of accidents, and create economic shocks that are felt far from the front line. The transcript also says Israel has warned it may strike Iranian national infrastructure to impose economic damage on the regime. That posture, if sustained, would elevate concerns that the conflict is drifting toward infrastructure warfare, where the pressure point becomes electricity, fuel distribution, transport, and industrial capacity. With both sides publicly committing to deepen the blows or promising heavier attacks, the space for de-escalation narrows. Leaders who speak in those terms often lock themselves into a cycle where stepping back can be portrayed as weakness and where each new strike becomes a test of credibility. That dynamic is particularly dangerous in a region where multiple militaries operate in close proximity and where outside powers maintain bases and alliances that can bring them into the line of fire quickly. One of the most consequential claims in the transcript is that Iran has expanded its operations to include U.S. military installations in the Gulf. The transcript attributes to an outlet it calls Al Jazeera a report that the Iranian army claimed it targeted a U.S. base in Saudi Arabia and a base in Kuwait using Arash 2 drones. Those specific base names and the details of the alleged attack would require careful verification. The United States maintains a substantial military presence across the Gulf, including in Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and elsewhere. Any confirmed strike on U.S. forces would represent a major escalation with potentially far-reaching consequences, including direct U.S. retaliation and a widening of the conflict. Additional states. In the transcripts telling, Iran framed the alleged strikes as a response to what it portrays as regional states allowing their territory to be used in attacks on Iranian soil. That aligns with a long-standing Iranian position that neighboring countries hosting U.S. forces or facilitating operations could be treated as complicit. Iran has repeatedly warned Gulf states against allowing their territory or airspace to be used for attacks, and those warnings typically intensify during periods of heightened tension. In the transcript, Iran's foreign minister is identified as Abbas Araghchi, described as making that point in a phone call with his Qatari counterpart, arguing that states have a legal responsibility to prevent their territories from being used as platforms for aggression. The diplomatic message described pressuring neighbors to keep distance from any U.S. or Israeli military action fits a recognizable pattern of Iranian regional diplomacy during crisis, particularly as Tehran seeks to deter cooperation with U.S. and Israeli operations and to isolate the battlefield. Qatar is central to such calculations because it hosts Al Udeid Air Base, a major U.S. military hub in the Middle East and a key node for U.S. air operations. The transcript claims Doha has faced attacks from Iranian forces since the start of the war last month, another assertion that would require verification given its gravity. Any direct attack on Qatar would risk triggering a wider regional crisis, not only because of the U.S. presence, but because of Qatar's role as a mediator in multiple regional conflicts. Alongside claims of strikes and counterstrikes, the transcript contains an explicit Iranian warning about retaliation if civilian targets are hit, language that both aims to deter and sets conditions for escalation beyond the immediate battlefield. The transcript attributes to the Iranian military a statement promising a multiplied response if attacks on civilian and objectives continue as presented. It reads, Asterisks, Iranian military, we have stated from the very beginning that any aggression targeting civilian objectives would be met with a decisive multiplied response against the enemy's interest in any part of the entire region. If attacks on civilian targets are repeated, the next phases of our offensive and retaliatory operations will be carried out much more devastatingly and widely, and the losses and damages from persisting in this approach will be multiplied. Asterisk, the deterrent logic is clear. Raise the cost of escalation by warning that attacks on infrastructure or population centers will trigger a broader, more punishing response. But the wording also expands the implied battlefield. The phrase, any part of the entire region, can be read as an explicit warning that allied or partner states' commercial interests and regional choke points, including shipping routes, energy facilities, and transport corridors, could be pulled into the conflict. Those fears are already visible in the Gulf, where energy and industrial nodes are among the most sensitive targets in any Iran-linked escalation. The transcript describes claims that Saudi Arabia closed the only road linking it to Bahrain after missiles were fired toward the kingdom's oil-rich eastern province, language that appears to refer to the King Fahd Causeway, a critical link for commerce and movement. It also describes claims that Saudi air defenses intercepted more than a dozen missiles and drones over eastern regions, and that heavy fire was reported from an industrial facility in Jubail, an area known for major industrial and petrochemical installations. These claims would also require independent confirmation, but they reflect the central strategic reality. The Gulf's energy infrastructure is both economically vital and militarily vulnerable, and threats against it can have immediate global implications. In Iran, the possibility of attacks on power generation